Ladies and gentlemen, live from Chicago, it's the SLA. Please welcome SLA President Allison Rich, Senior Associate Director of Athletics at Princeton University, Karen Leetzow, Chief Legal Officer of U.S. Soccer, and Cliff Stein, Senior Vice President and General Counsel of the Chicago Bears.
Welcome, everybody. We're happy to have you here. As you've heard, I'm Allison Rich, Senior Associate Director of Athletics at Princeton, and I'm the President of the Sports Lawyers Association. And I'm so happy to see all of you here at our first in-person event since February of 2020. So, yay, we made it. Glad to have you all here. And hopefully it's the first of many, many more. So thank you all for coming. Thanks for those of you who are watching live on Facebook and any of you who are watching recorded. We wish you were here, but we're happy you're tuning in. So this has been a really interesting year for us, for all of us. I think we've learned a lot about ourselves and about our industry, and we've done things that we probably would never have thought possible. I know we've Zoomed more than we've ever thought possible. I hope a lot of you had a chance to redo your houses and bake sourdough bread and dance on TikTok and all the things you wanted to do. Although if you're like me, you probably found yourself without any games and no travel, but still busier than you've ever been before. So hopefully we are turning the page. So with the Sports Lawyers Association, the pandemic came at a really interesting time because we were working on our strategic plan at the time and looking for ways that we could engage more and provide more benefits to our membership and our sponsors during the year between our amazing annual conferences in May. And being that we strive to be the preeminent sports law organization in the world and provide all kinds of expert information and education on the various legal issues that are happening at the time, we developed a plan to further connect with our members and provide all of that information, as well as have that in-person connection during the year. So having podcasts and webinars, and we were going to announce all of this at our 2020 May conference, talk about our initial plan, how we were gonna ramp it up and find out what worked for us and really move forward. And then we had to cancel the May 2020 conference, so we had to pivot like everybody else. And luckily, we had a plan in place, and we were flying the plane while building it, but we were flying. And we developed our first webinars based on the panels that we had in place for the conference and had those out for our members for some CLE credits, since we were all missing out on that CLE bonanza we get every May from the in-person conference. And then we reached out to our board members and our members and asked for content and asked for advice and thoughts on what they would like to see and what they'd like to present for us. And we had virtual outreach events, and we had webinars, and we had podcasts, and people came, so we made more. And over the course of the last year and a half, we've had 45 different virtual events. We're really proud of that, and we're going to continue to do that. But we thought that originally would be in addition to in-person events, but it has definitely helped keep us together during this time. We also hosted a fantastic virtual conference this past May. Hopefully all of you were able to attend. Our chair and our vice chairs, Laith Gafoor and Jema Meyer and Naima Stevenson-Starks, did a really amazing job with pulling together content and entertainment. It was a fantastic event, and it gave us a chance also to connect, even virtually, which was really important considering most of us know that one of the best parts of SLA is the people and the connections that you make with those people. But now we're back. Delta and other variants permitting, we hope. And thank you all for sticking with us and embracing that pivot that we all had to embrace. And we plan to continue on with our virtual events, the webinars, the podcasts, the biweekly sports short events, the virtual outreach events, but we want to do those in addition to in-person events. And there'll be more coming. You'll see, you've probably already seen your emails for some more coming, starting with the one today. So please keep providing us with feedback and giving us ideas for content, things you'd like to see, things you'd like to talk about. If you'd like to provide some of that content, we'd love to have you. And if any of you who are not members, please join us. The costs are very reasonable. The CLE alone is well worth the value, although we all know that the Sports Lawyers Association provides so much more than that. It's just an amazing network of really interesting people who are engaged in the ethical practice of sports law in all areas of the field, and it's a really good group of people to be involved with. So we hope you'll watch for our upcoming 50th anniversary celebration of Title IX and all the amazing opportunities it's given to women in sports and in education over the years, and also join us as we continue our commitment to a diverse, equitable, and inclusive environment in the law community and beyond. So now back to today. A lot went into making this event happen, and I'm really grateful to everybody who had a hand in it. Thank you to our executive director, Melissa Pomerine, who had the great idea for us to have this event in Chicago, for getting us all here and making this happen. To Doug Masters, who's our Chicago outreach coordinator, who's done a great job pulling together our amazing panelists and getting people here and making this happen today. And our National Outreach Committee chairs, Vered Yakovi and especially Norm Wayne, who really shouldered a lot of this work from afar, especially while he was knee-deep in the Olympic Games. So with that, I am thrilled to be joined by two amazing panelists to talk about current issues in sports law and their experiences this past year and a half and beyond. So brief introductions, and I'll let them talk a little bit more, but Karen Leetzow, to my right here, is Chief Legal Officer for U.S. Soccer. She spent 21 years at NASCAR before, so she's only arrived at U.S. Soccer in 2020, so that I'm sure there's been an interesting transition for you. And she was Senior Vice President and the first female General Counsel for NASCAR before that, where she was there for 21 years. And she earned her J.D. at American University Washington College of Law in Washington, D.C., and her B.A. in Political Science from the University of Vermont. And then Cliff Stein is the Senior Vice President and General Counsel for the Chicago Bears, and he's been with the organization for 20 years. Before joining the Bears, he represented NFL players in contract negotiations and was a certified contract advisor with the NFLPA. He graduated magna cum laude from Temple University in 1991 with a degree in business law and finance, and received his Juris Doctorate from Temple University as well in 1994. So I have a bunch of questions for these two, and we will also leave some time at the end for questions. And if you have questions along the way, please don't hesitate to signal us, and we'll loop you in as well. So we will jump right into it. How are your organizations, this is kind of based on what I've been talking about so far, but how are your organizations addressing the latest COVID news and protocols? And are you able to draw on some of the things that you've learned over the last 18 months, and what best practices are emerging along the way?
Cliff, you want to go first?
Sure. Well, it goes back to when all this started, because this is something that all team general counsels had to become heavily involved in. The NFL, with the NFLPA, negotiated intense and robust protocols that would apply to the players. And so one of the things that they did immediately was they set up weekly calls so that all 32 club councils were on a call at the same time so that we can share information. We're making sure we're doing everything to comply with the protocols that are being put in place. So you have the, not only the state orders and safety protocols, you have the CDC, you have the city, and then you have the NFL. So we made sure that we were properly setting up everything we needed to do to make it safe for our players, safe for the fans to the extent that we were going to be able to have them. And now we do have fans at training camp and at games, which we start tomorrow, which is good news. And so just making sure that, when we're bringing employees back, that we're doing everything we're supposed to do in terms of making them feel comfortable and safe, following the NFL protocols, but also just changing, doing what we need to do to put things in the building in place for, and all the forms that are required, with whether we had to decide if we were going to require vaccinations or we were going to require masks, and staying on top of what all the other teams and businesses were doing in the community so that we are doing the right thing for our employees. So it's an endless task that we are still currently involved in. And right now, the main focus is the games, training camp and the games, safety of the player, fans, and our employees.
Are you requiring vaccinations and masks?
So we are not requiring vaccinations. One of the things we started doing when we put together a return to work playbook early on, when we knew we were going to bring people back, was we did a vaccination certification form. And before we even rolled that out, we had to look into, all the different laws that apply to that with ADA and HIPAA, and just making sure we're not collecting medical information. So we are, with those forms completed, we are at 97% vaccinated for non-football employees. We are 100% for football staff, which includes coaches, trainers, scouts, anyone who is near the players. And that is a requirement by the NFL. They're called tiered employees. It's a set number of employees that you can have that are in the same area of the players. That's required to be vaccinated, so they are 100%. And then And then with the players, that's they're not required to be vaccinated, and we did not extend that to staff. But if you are not vaccinated and you haven't completed a form, you have to wear a mask.
So we're a little different because our players are not just our own players, they also play in other leagues. So we're dependent on the COVID protocols in other environments in addition to our own COVID protocols. So when we pull our very talented national team players out of MLS or NWSL, obviously we're not only hoping that those organizations are keeping them safe, but then when we pull them into our environment that they're safe. So we have additional protocols that each of them had to go through in order to enter into our environment and to keep them safe for the games we played. Initially, we really just stopped playing games, and particularly at our youth levels, we just stopped altogether. At the national team level, we've slowly evolved to starting to play again, and obviously the entry into our environment and the exit from our environment are extraordinarily important. So we have robust testing protocols that are comparable to any that the other leagues are doing. That applies to our staff as well. We've operated mostly in the bubble environment where we protect our players and our staff. And the difficulty for us has been, obviously, when we play games, they're often international. So we're inviting teams from other parts of the world. So obviously, when you're coming from the Southern Hemisphere, their COVID protocols might not have been what we would have liked them to be. And so we had competitors' players often test positive. But we've been very, very lucky in our environments to have very, very few cases and to catch them before they got into our environment. But like everyone else, we're struggling. On the employee side, we have not decided yet whether we're going to require vaccination, but I think we're leaning in that direction. I think we want to be leaders in this space, and we want to promote health and safety in our environment. That said, just on a voluntary basis, we're well over 85% of our employees because we believe strongly, that we do want to be leaders in this space. So, but like everyone else, we've been challenged with this new Delta variant, and we're making decisions, literally having conversations daily about, do we return to work? Are we going to go back into a space? And as a not-for-profit organization, we're operating in a historic building here. US Soccer is in Soccer House. For those of you who don't know, beautiful historic building, but very, very limited space. And so we're going to have to make decisions perhaps differently than others because we don't have the room to social distance, and we may just ultimately defer our reentry into the traditional workforce for a while.
So are you still remote right now?
We are still remote. We have the option to come in. We come in, we sign in, we have COVID protocols coming into the building. People have to declare their vaccination status, and we do wear masks in the building.
Okay, great. Is there anything that you guys have changed during COVID that you might keep, hopefully when this is finally gone? Any protocol or any procedures that seem to work?
I mean, for us, we're definitely looking at more of just the need, it's okay to work from home. Right. Our staff and I'm sure many businesses have shown this, that we're proven to be very productive and efficient. It's obviously tiring to do it, or just there's fatigue and being home too much. But the fact that we were forced to do it, and we really discovered video conferencing in a whole different way that we were never using. So that will definitely be used a lot. Virtual, remote work from home policies will probably continue for quite some time. And I think just the whole perspective on, you're not working unless you're in the office, that's going to change for good.
That's good.
Yeah, I think the remote work, I think for many of us was a dream. As a working mom, I would have loved to had, the ability to work remotely when my kids were little. But I think being forced by this virus to look at the world differently has allowed us to take a lot of the positive things that come from remote work and see how we can apply them in a lot of ways, both to be more inclusive and pull people in from remote locations, and also to look at how we, particularly as a not-for-profit, how can we use it in talent recruitment and talent retention, where we might not have an opportunity in a traditional environment to attract employees, or have employees that are in New York City or New Jersey. Can we deploy this? Is there a way to do this? The limitations, I'm sure, for Cliff and other organizations in sports is that we're in the live events business. And so we have live events, and so there's a certain subset of our workforce that is just going to have to, be there. And so that, the understanding as senior leaders, what does that do to morale? How do people think about the fact that some of the workforce might be able to be more flexible and be remote while others have to be live? And I think there's a tension there that we have to kind of figure out how we're going to solve, because we do want the best of both worlds, but not at the expense of having a dysfunctional culture.
I agree. I think we're all in that same space. There's just a lot of our jobs that we can't do virtually. You can't have a game virtually, so you can do the office work, but it's definitely a change. So I agree. That's going to be interesting.
Sure.
Cool. So post-COVID, she says optimistically, how do you see sport being consumed differently? So, coming off the Summer Olympics, which were one of the lowest rated Summer Olympics in many years, and I think a lot of that is probably because of streaming opportunities and because we all knew the results of those events before they were aired in prime time. But how do you see what's changed for you in your sports? How do you see things going moving forward from this? And what are you using to try to capture some of these new types of audiences? Or
I'm going to sound like the old lady, but I struggle in the sense to find the things I want to watch because of how fractured the media space is. And I know my kids feel differently. They can just, I'm going to download this app and look in this space. But I do think it's going to change. Whether or not we're actually making changes for the better, I'm still on the fence. I think that it's what you want is you want to be able to easily consume content, and obviously, logging onto Twitter and seeing the results of something is super easy. But really finding that game experience and getting our fans to that game experience, I struggle sometimes to see how we're going to be able to do that in this very fractured marketplace.
I would say we're going to do everything we can to. We see this excitement now. Like our ticket office talks to the fans every day, and we have, we can only bring 1,000 fans a day or 1,300 fans a day to House Hall, which is where we work because of space limitations. But we have 40,000 people a day that want to come. So we see the excitement of people wanting to come back, and we're hoping that. That they want to consume it this way. Like they're so, obviously we want to do it safely. We want to make sure, everyone feels comfortable and there's no changes and anything that happens with COVID. The NFL is doing a lot. They started even before COVID, so aware that where things are going with TV, and you can watch games on Amazon Prime now. Like that they'll see more things go that way because we know, and this might be a topic you'll talk about later, but just getting the next generation in. To me, that's a bigger issue than post-COVID consumption. And anybody who has children knows that they don't consume any entertainment the way that we do. They're doing it in short TikTok, Instagram, Twitter, whatever. I mean, it's just short little clips. They're getting a lot of information. We're not getting an entire game. And the NFL started Red Zone a few years ago. For anybody who's like a fantasy football player, Red Zone is awesome. Like, you're just seeing the scores. When a team is in the red zone, they're about to score. So if you love football, and that really goes to the attention level of just sort of the next generation, and just finding ways to do that to keep them engaged, so that if they come to the games, what can we do there? That there's some social media component, that there's interaction between the fan and the game, because that's what they're used to.
I love the Red Zone because I'm a Bears fan, but I live not in Chicago. So for me to be able to see anytime there's a scoring play and then still keep up with the other games, it's great. But you're right, it's definitely different than we used to consume it with watching a single game at one time from beginning to end with commercials and all of that. So
For sure.
What's U.S. Soccer doing?
So we're, obviously with our broadcast agreements, broadcasting the entire game. We have fans, in the stands, in the places where we're actually playing the games. And we're attempting all the same things that Cliff's talking about in terms of trying to engage fans to be part of the U.S. soccer experience with social media and other sort of direct-to-consumer events. But it is, it's a challenge to try and connect the limited attention span that people have to understanding the score or what was the cool play to the entire event, and then obviously converting it to a ticket sale. I do think that we've seen a lot of demand for the live event, cooped up demand of people being ready to get out there and experience live soccer, and we're lucky as we're heading into a World Cup season, particularly for the women, and we're going to have domestic World Cup experiences here for the men, that there is sort of excitement building, and that's been super helpful for us to grab eyeballs and attention.
Great. I mean, not having sports, I was talking to somebody out in the hallway earlier where we were talking about watching the Korean Baseball League and competitive cornhole because we didn't have any other sports that were happening, right? Something I never would have thought I'd watch, but it was really engaging because I really missed the sports. And so having live events back has been so positive and helpful. And so hopefully that's a plus to bring people in.
I found myself at opening day for the Cubs with, all my sweaters and socks on because I was desperate to get out there and be part of a live event, even if I was socially distant, from the person next to me. You just want to get out and see that if you're a sports fan.
Agreed. And you had games last year, but obviously in a very different type environment.
Yeah, it was very strange. So like for TV, I thought it was great. I think people loved having football back. I loved having football back as a fan. But if you were at the stadium, the empty seats were staring at you. It was eerie for the players. It almost felt like a practice. For the limited employees that got to be there, like it was really distraction from watching the game because it was just all these empty seats and the buzz and the crowd noise. Obviously, in a lot of sports, football mainly, the crowd noise is a big part of the game. Being home, the home field advantage just wasn't there.
Yeah. What were your thoughts on the fake crowd noise that some sports decided to deploy? I thought that was an interesting way to try and make people feel like things were normal, but I'm not sure it translated the way people thought it did.
Yeah. So the NFL, what they actually did, and whether it was successful or not is a question, but they took footage and got the audio from every different stadium. So if it was a Packers game, you had the weather conditions and the Go Pack Go and all the different chants, so that you had authentic audio from the same type of conditions. And for TV, once in a while I did notice it. I can't imagine that it went well in person though.
I can see that. But
I wasn't at any game, so I don't know.
that's right. You probably weren't allowed to be there.
No, we couldn't be there.
So, interesting, though, to hear the chatter on the field, right? Because, those of us who stand on the sidelines from time to time, you hear that, but you're not used to hearing that on TV. So hearing the talk on the sidelines, hearing the noise in the game, I thought was very interesting. It's something to hear on television. I was, not used to hearing that. So I think that was an experience probably for some people who hadn't heard that before, but...
I think it's fascinating that we actually even thought about it. When you think about seeing, like you said, we were super grateful to have football on TV, but there's some element of having fans in the stands, even if you're not actually one of those fans in the stands, the excitement of the people there translates to you in your living room. And I think we felt it a little bit during Olympic play, at least I did when watching the women play, that they're just, if they're not there, it's you feel it at home. And so fans in the stands, even in a television broadcast, I think matter.
Yeah. The fan reaction in football and all sports, I would say, is a confirmation of what just happened on the field. Yeah. Whether it's a cheer, a boo, a bad call by a ref, you're used to hearing that. It's subliminal, but you're used to hearing that confirmation, especially if you're somebody that might like to watch it, but you're not really knowledgeable about the game. Oh, what just happened? Why are they going crazy?
Yeah.
You lost that whole component.
Right. Agreed. Interesting. We'll see what happens. Hopefully we get to have fans in the stands for real this year, all the way through the season. All right, so switching gears a little bit, in the world of college athletics, my day-to-day life, we are knee-deep in the world of name, image, and likeness. And this is something that is new, and we're trying to figure out policies for it and how best to support student athletes through this while still maintaining their amateur status. So how do you see this impacting your sports, if at all?
I think it's an awareness of name, image, likeness more than anything. I think in professional sports generally, that's kind of what we've been dealing with, sort of the athlete relationship and certainly in my time at NASCAR, how do you get the athlete's name, image, and likeness to be part of the organization? Unlike other professional sports, NASCAR's drivers are part of teams that are independent of the league itself. And so you always were negotiating for name, image, likeness rights if you wanted them directly with the players and the teams that they were on. So in U.S. soccer now, it's sort of part of our collective bargaining agreements in which we would bargain for the right to use player likenesses in any of the advertising and promotion we do. So more now of an awareness that this is athletes' rights and athletes' imagery is one of the most valuable things that exist in sports, but I don't think it really changes the dynamic for us at U.S. Soccer or in my former job at NASCAR.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if it changed anything. I was asked that question, like, if you have a first-round draft pick and that player, while he's in college, gets used to certain sponsorship or endorsement deals because of the NIL rights, and then they come in to the team, and the team doesn't want those distractions coming in, whereas right now we do try to, initially as a rookie, control that to some extent so that it doesn't become a distraction before they've done anything on the field. But if they're walking into the building and they're all used to having that, is that going to create any challenges to just level set their expectation? Because now there's this whole marketing revenue that they would learn for the first time when they become a professional player, that now they're already educated on it. More so though, and I've been, just educating myself with, because I was a former agent, is it's opened up a whole new business for agents, and they're creating NIL agency agreements. So NFLPA certified contract advisors, and same thing with every other sport, can now go in, sign a player, the compliance officer at the school will allow it, and they're doing what they couldn't do before. They can now have an agent, and that agent's going to represent them to be a professional athlete when they're done playing. So to the extent that they were trying to create a deterrent from them having that access, I don't know if it's going to change the game. I think it's just it might change their expectations and when it comes to compensation, which could cause more distraction.
I think it's good to have agents just because, or advisors at the very least, for those who have larger contracts and maybe hadn't worked in this space before knowing what to do. But I know they're technically not allowed to be represented by them for any kind of professional competition, but I'm sure the relationship leads to that later on. One of the things that we've been seeing is that there are some professional teams that are striking deals with college players now to represent the professional teams. Are you hearing anything about that in your space? I think hockey is the first one I've heard that did that in Florida with some University of Florida athletes, but
It's always Florida.
right.
Yeah.
Sure, we'll call them trendsetters.
Trendsetters, yeah. No, actually, we haven't seen any of that, but it's interesting to think about what we might be facing as we go forward. I think it's evolving so quickly. I'm not even sure I've been able to imagine all the issues that could come up for us in this space, especially because a lot of our athletes are sort of collegiate athletes who are leaving college with, as Cliff said, an expectation, and then rolling into national team soccer play. It'll be interesting to see what kind of conflicts arise and issues we face.
Yeah, the contact and any contact and communication with a college player is very, very regulated with the NFL. So that they would never allow that. We can't even have, like, if a college player is eligible for the draft and they wanted to work out at our facility, like we can have no contact with them. So that's an interesting thing that they're going to need to get their arms around. And with the agents part, like I'm more worried about, I know that anybody out here in the agent business, but I know that like when I was an agent, there were agents giving players money, to sign with them as sort of an advance or maybe just a gift. This NIL, if they don't get on top of it, it's easy for an agent to kind of create a fake sponsorship or endorsement opportunity to get the player to sign with them. And so there could be money flowing out there to players that's under the guise of NIL. That's not really that, because there's so much competition in that business.
Right. Thank you. I needed something else to worry about.
So keep an eye out for that at Princeton.
Oh, man. That's really crazy times, but I guess we'll see. So what do you think are some of the biggest challenges facing the sports industry today?
I think for us, it's still understanding what's going to happen with COVID. And so a lot of, as a league or, managing athletic events, what we do is we sell sponsorship, we sell relationships, we sell activation. And now you're hoping that all of those things will be going back to normal and that we'll be able to do those things. But you don't know. And then you're having to negotiate with partners on give backs or relief for things they bought. And they're very hesitant to write big checks for things that may not happen. And so it's just a really difficult sort of evolving time, and especially for a small not-for-profit. That is our revenue stream. That's what goes back into the sport. That's how it helps support athlete development for future athletes. And so for us, it's a little bit precarious trying to just act as if everything's normal, and then knowing that, here we are, we're back to different states shutting things down. So it's a little scary right now.
I think force majeure is a
Force
term
majeure
that a
is a
lot of
thing,
people
yeah.
learned, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
So
Now all the non-lawyers know force majeure.
Force
Right?
majeure, that's right. All our business people, they
true.
do.
It's true. We
I
need
would
it.
say in addition to obviously COVID, that's huge right now. We're going to be dealing with this for a long time. But to also, just aside from that, who is the future fan? Understanding, not resting on our laurels. Yes, we're very popular, win or lose, we're selling tickets, but how are we going to keep, who's going to be the future season ticket holder? How do we keep them coming to games? How do we, as we said earlier, create additional content that they're looking for? How do we keep them buying our merchandise? And we're doing things like we just for the first time spun off in another business where we have a fitness center. And so we're trying to tap into another way to engage fans, but just thinking outside the box, and that, in addition to that, and the sports book emergence of the sports wagering through sports is something that teams, business leaders, general counsels are going to have to really take a close look at to understand, the revenue opportunity, but also how does this open up to your fan base. But really just, trying to really predict the future and get your arms around. And that opens up, our data analytics department has grown substantially even over the last 5 years. I mean, the amount of information they know about the fan is incredibly valuable. It triggers decisions that we make that we wouldn't have otherwise made, or money that we spend that we wouldn't otherwise spend or not spend. And so doing that with going as young as you possibly can to gather that information to understand the future fan, because our season ticket holders are going to get older, and how do we keep their, the next generation as interested?
So with sports wagering, you probably already have people in the stands who are putting bets on all kinds of random things that are related to the game. Some are ancillary to the game, but do you see the NFL or the individual teams getting more engaged with that and having opportunities for maybe in-seat betting, or?
I do. I think it's, right now, and Karen knows about this because her husband's the general counsel for the Cubs, but they're going to have, they've got an approved sports book, and you're going to see that more common. Now in the NFL, and I think even in baseball right now, you can't have a sports book in a stadium, but that's going to change. We can have what's called a sports betting lounge. So NFL teams are allowed to create an area that looks and feels like a sports book. It'll have all the TVs, it'll have the betting lines, and most likely you will have a sports book operator sponsor, which we do have now, which is a whole new area of sponsorship that we didn't have before or wasn't even allowed. And they will sort of operate this sports betting lounge where you won't actually take bets, but you'll have information available to you on how you can set up an account online, and how you can, and there will be some representative from the company. So it will almost feel like it's the next step towards a sports book. And the gaming companies are really heavily pursuing teams and stadiums right now. And so for me, in the last couple of years, the need for strong gaming counsel has become a whole new thing. My first 17 years, I'd never even knew there was a gaming council. And so that's becoming more an emerging field for sports. I see gaming council being a regular part, part of any professional team.
This conversation makes me feel old. I remember back in the day when I first started at NASCAR, the family was so opposed on moral grounds to having any kind of relationship at all with any kind of a betting company. They didn't want to license poker chips or anything that, even remotely resembled gambling. And then there was a slow transition to allowing, well, maybe we'll allow hotels that also have casinos to brand the race cars. And then, all right, maybe we don't need the hotels, the casino can actually brand the race cars. And then before you knew it, they had diversified and built a casino next to one of the racetracks in Kansas, and we're making money off gambling. Now we're talking about actually people doing it in the stands at our events. It's in a crazy evolution over the course of 20, 25 years. And then you have, particularly in US soccer, now you have the whole focus on integrity, making sure in soccer has a long history of sort of unscrupulous behavior on the field and people doing things they shouldn't be doing. How do you regulate the integrity side of the business and keeping your sport clean, but yet people can still wager? And so the evolution just in my lifetime of this topic it's been crazy.
It's so easy now too. I mean, with DraftKings and FanDuel, you have kids that are growing up with fantasy football, which is excellent, but it's first introduction in sort of that whole gambling world. And now, for $5 you can place a bet and kids are winning money. So you have teenagers and college students, like that's part of their life now. They all have an account, so it's another expectation. When you talk about the future fan, like that's something they are doing.
Yeah. Yeah, and then you have all the warnings like you have with alcohol. Now that you have gambling, you have to warn about that and addiction and one more thing.
Responsible gambling messaging, yeah.
Very interesting. Well, I want to encourage the audience. We have some more questions, but if there's anything you guys want to ask, I'd say put it in the chat, but we're live, so just raise your hand or stand up, and we'd certainly love to answer any questions that you have. In the meantime, we're waiting for all the people to line up. So we have some law students watching today, some lawyers who are newer in the field, or maybe people who are looking at different ways to get into sports law or move around. So, talk a little bit about, some of the best advice you've received or some of the lessons that you've learned along the way that you think would be really helpful to people as they're thinking about things.
Yeah. One of my tried and true things I think I say to young people all the time is there is no such thing as a sports lawyer. I mean, I'll leave it to Cliff, but I think on any given day, people are looking at, we're looking at contracts. We might be looking at, employment issues. We might be looking, God forbid, at some bankruptcy-related question. I mean, it is really, sports is really all areas of law wrapped into one. And yes, your client happens to be in sports, but all of your life experience as a lawyer is going to serve you in sports. And so don't get discouraged if you're doing something right now that you don't think is leading you to that sports position you want. It all will serve you in the end. I started my career originally as just a general commercial litigator. The first 2 years I was out of law school, hated every single second of it, and then was asked to join a trademark practice, which branding kind of got me excited. And then I never, ever thought I was going to be a sports lawyer. I got recruited to come work as a trademark lawyer for NASCAR and ended up 20 years later leading the organization's legal department as their general counsel. But it had nothing to do with me saying I want to be a sports lawyer. It was that I was well-rounded and had a lot of experiences and that I was able to apply to the sports law practice. And so here I am now in soccer, and it's a whole new adventure. Also lots of similarities to NASCAR, but also lots of differences. And so I'm being asked to deploy all those fundamental skills in a new sports space. So I think for me, it's just, consider every experience you have as valuable because it really, really is.
That's really good advice.
Yeah, I totally agree with everything Karen said. And if you're a law student watching this, I mean, when I was in law school, I had no idea that I would work in sports. And I took one sports law class for fun, and everybody in that class seemed like they wanted to be a sports agent, and I did not at all. And when I graduated, I wanted to go into environmental law. I started environmental law counsel in law school, and that was like my passion. I went to work for a medium-sized labor, union-side labor law firm, that was a 60-lawyer firm in South Jersey, New Jersey, that had a big toxic tort case. And it was a class action against DuPont. And in my mind, that was environmental law. So I got on board on that case, and I had friends who played college football at high levels, and my brother was a baseball scout for the Houston Astros. So I had people chirping at me like, you should be an agent, like you love sports and you should be an agent. I did love football and I did play football. So finally, while I was in my first year as an associate, I took on, one of the things you do as a union side labor attorney as an associate is you are on call for the union. So we represented hundreds of unions and they had prepaid legal services. So I basically was at the phone, and if they called, they had free services, so I would give them, they would get like a real estate transaction or collections letters to help them with, or municipal court representation or DUIs and whatever it was, like they had stuff covered or discounted. So I learned a lot about a broad-based section, and I also did some workers' comp, and my good best friend growing up, his college co-captain at Maryland was playing for the Denver Broncos at the time. And he needed help with a workers' comp case in Colorado. And even though I wasn't a Colorado workers' comp attorney, I had him send it to me, and we looked it over. And then next thing I know, a few months later, I'm interviewing to be his agent. And I became certified as an NFLPA contract advisor. I was too young. I was only a year or two older than him. And in his dad's mind, I didn't have any experience. So I brought my sports law professor, who happened to have been an agent, and he was a partner at Ballard Spar in their labor law section, but he also was he represented some top athletes and coaches. So he sat in with me, and this player, his name was Darren Drozdov, who ended up being a professional wrestler as well with the WWE. He signed with me, and then a few months later, my sports law professor, his name was John Langle, he said, you don't need me in this, you just take over. And then from there, I started a small sports law practice that the firm I was working for thought was kind of really cool. And then after 3 years, I broke off and I went to practice with one other attorney, and we just had a general law practice that had sports involved. That was how I ended up with the Bears. But I would say that, and I say this to attorneys that have worked for me, having that real life experience that wasn't sports related was so beneficial. I mean, to this day, I've talked to employees, I talk to players, I talk to ownership about legal issues I'm aware of or have knowledgeable or know where to research because of what I did in the real world. And I had a law student come to me from Harvard who he did an internship with me that turned into a full-time job, and he worked for me for 5 years. And during those entire 5 years, I told him, you need to go out there, go work at a law firm. You'll make triple the money and you'll get great experience. And he did. And he went to Kirkland Ellis, and he became a partner, and now he's a general counsel at a firm, not sports related, but getting the real life experience. And when I was your position, meaning young lawyers or law students, I was looking at everybody's bios. So I was looking at, when I finally did want to become an agent, I looked at most of the top sports agents' bios, and I saw that they all worked, the ones that were lawyers, they all did something else before they got into sports. And that, to me, was the most important advice I could give, is that just don't worry if you're doing something else. It translates over, whether it's family law, employment law, just interacting with other lawyers or judges. It's really important. And as an employer, I think that's important to look for, to know that they have experience. It's harder to come right out of law school and do it.
I think that's really important also, because I think, we get so busy in our day-to-day lives, and you can get so siloed or so focused. And so having some awareness of things that are happening in areas outside of your day-to-day experience is so important, whether it's for me in another school or around the country, and for you with other teams and other issues. I think that's really important, to be able to be aware of what's happening outside and kind of notice trends and things that could affect you or could be helpful to you before maybe others would, because they're not looking up or around.
And after all, the sports is a business, right? And so all of the same rules that apply to business apply to sports business. And so having some experience around those things is only helpful. And I think it's been rare in my career and all the hires I've made where I've hired someone who was from another sport. Occasionally, I've done it, but more often than not, I wanted the well-rounded applicant, somebody who was hungry, who maybe had some familiarity with some topic that comes up a lot. So maybe it's branding, maybe it's employment, because I can always take that and mold it into being a sports lawyer. It's harder to go the other way, or somebody who's only thinking about sports, who doesn't have any other life experience.
That's huge. All right, so let's talk about drugs. So marijuana being legalized in various states all over the country. How is this affecting what you're doing with your policies? Or, I mean, obviously there's larger league issues, there are team issues. What are you looking at with that? How is that affecting what you're doing?
It's a great question. I mean, I think for us, it's really taken out of our hands. We are, we have to comply with all of the USOPC guidelines and all the regulations that FIFA has for what it takes for players to compete. And obviously, competing clean is one of the most important tenets of, the Olympics. And so we are governed by that, and those are the policies we stick to. So it's not a lot. There's not a lot of thought that needs to go into it from our perspective. We just need to make sure that we're in compliance.
But for you, football players a lot of times talk about helping with pain. So is that something that, there are a lot of conversations about that?
There are conversations. Right now, it's a banned substance.
Right.
So when they test for it, if you test, you're subject to the substance abuse policy. I'm sure there's going to be subject to a lot of discussion. So really, there's some controversy. Obviously, if they're in a state and they have it for legal reasons, and then they test positive, there's obviously controversy in there because, I'm sure players that are in states like Colorado and Washington and or everywhere where it's legal, like they feel like they're being, not treated fairly. But yeah, I think that conversation is going to keep going as the way the law views it. It's still sort of up in the air with the states and the federal government sort of looking at it differently.
Right, probably collective bargaining too.
Yeah, I'm sure it comes up in all the collective bargaining discussions. I'm sure it came up last time, and nothing really changed right now.
Yeah.
And if anything else, I have to call Adolfo Birch because that was his area of specialty.
Even though.
I think it's hard on the corporate side too, with the just regular employees and having to understand what people are dealing with, and you have that the privacy issues, and people may be undergoing treatment, they may have prescriptions, and just a lot of it feels like it's, as Cliff said, evolving, right? It's evolving, and so you just have to have your finger on the pulse of what's happening. And if you have offices in multiple different states, be aware of the differences. And obviously the federal government has a different opinion than many of the states do, and just kind of, keep yourself apprised of where things are going. But I do think that this is a Pandora's box. It's been opened, and we're all going to have to make some decisions around it.
Yeah, and from a team side, regardless of what the policy is, like just knowing that it's prevalent in society, not just with players, just with everyone. And so it's just one more thing that we have to worry about when it comes to driving and staying up late and just keeping an eye, making sure that our players, our employees are doing the right thing, so that if missing games or whatever could happen as a result, like it's just one more thing that our people, our director of security, our VP of player engagement, all of our support staff, our mental health clinician, like our trainer, they just need to know that it's prevalent, it's legal for a lot of reasons, and it's going to be in the building, it's going to be part of society. So just knowing how to navigate that, and in the scouting process too. That you're going to, our scouts are like detectives. They're going to go on these campuses and they're going to know certain things about players. It's one thing to do it legally, another thing where it could become a problem.
Yeah, I
And
think it's a spectrum too, right? Like when we were talking about people getting in a race car and driving 200 miles an hour, the spectrum, the way you would look at that might be completely differently than you would look at, somebody who's playing soccer or football. I mean, so having a tempered response that matches sort of what the environment you're in is going to be really important.
No, I think it came up for me probably 12, 13 years ago, where I was in a state where there was medical marijuana, so it wasn't legal for anything else, but I had a student athlete test positive for marijuana and came to my office to talk to me about it, and we were talking about consequences and what happened from here, and out comes the medical marijuana card. And that was a whole new thing that I'm looking for cameras, right? How am I going to deal with this? And so, because obviously it's banned by the NCAA, and some of that has changed, or the penalty has changed with the NCAA, but still it's a banned substance. So kind of creating guidelines around that, getting exceptions for her, but also being able to create those guidelines. So like you say, somebody's not practicing or traveling while they're high, or if they're high, depending on how they're consuming it. So it's very, very interesting. All right, last chance for questions from the audience. Yes.
What sort of challenges on the legal side do you have when you're looking at hosting the World Cup in 2026 as an organization in terms of planning not only for 5, 6 years out, but also given the pandemic and the situation we have right now, maybe almost planning for the unknown as much as planning for what's known? What sort of challenges do you find with a big event like that?
Yeah, it's really interesting. So the World Cup planning is being done primarily by FIFA itself. And so FIFA has decided that this particular World Cup will be played in multiple countries. And so there are federations from the US and Canada that will be working together to, launch this event. So it's a lot of coordination, but, it just like right now, there really aren't any answers. And so at this point, you plan for the best, and then you pray that against the worst, that worst happens, but you really have to plan for normal and then dial it back from there. And I think what we're doing in conjunction with FIFA is we're doing the visits with host cities, we're talking to host cities, we're planning as if everything's going to be fine, and then we're just hoping that time will give us the answers, on how we're going to be able to conduct this event. And it's complicated by the fact that this choice to play in multiple countries will require inter-country travel, and we're already bringing in competitors from all around the world, and now we're asking those competitors to travel not just to the US, but then back and forth between different venues and different places. The level of complexity that they've committed to at FIFA, I'm sure did not have COVID in mind. And so I think that we're doing it a day at a time is really what's happening.
I think we've all gotten a lot better at contingency planning in the last year.
It's really true, and really pivoting. And I'll just say that I'm really proud of our organization. We're very small. We're a not-for-profit, one of these national governing bodies. Our chief medical officer is a man named George Champas, who's been outstanding, helping us guide us through all of these crazy complications. And we rely heavily on them, sort of understanding the medical trends that are coming. The good news is that we don't have to plan the next one. The next one's for the women, and it's in Australia, and we'll take our cues from them. Okay. And so, and we'll hope that by 2026, when we've planned for the best can actually happen.
Good point.
He's one of our game day doctors, too.
Is he really?
Yeah,
George is fantastic.
That's great. So I know you can't speak for the NFL as a whole, but do you see things being held off for NFL Europe or any kind of games overseas that we were having pretty regularly for a while there?
No, I mean, they're very, very much interested in pursuing the international initiative. So one of the things that's being worked on right now is granting clubs rights to countries. So like the way the NFL works right now with the clubs, we only have marketing rights in our home marketing area, which basically right now would be Illinois or 75 miles from the city of Chicago, so it could touch on other states. Anything beyond that, which includes the internet, is the NFL's jurisdiction, which is frustrating a lot for our sponsors because everything is digital now. But one of the things they're doing is they realize that in order to grow the sport, clubs have to be able to market outside of this country. So they're gonna let clubs bid on certain countries that they're interested in, and they'll grant terms where clubs will have rights, international marketing rights to, it could be London, it could be Spain, it could be, certain portions of South America. And that's just in line with playing all these games in the UK, which are been increasing. So that you're going to have more and more teams play at least one game in London. We just played a couple of years ago. And trying to grow the sport where soccer is really huge, like La Liga, and try to introduce American football to them too, and get it at a grassroots place where they're playing the game. Because really, in order to love football, you have to, it helps if people are growing up and playing the sport. So that's on the horizon right now, to really continue to try to grow the sport internationally.
And you said you fell in love with soccer by experiencing it when you were overseas.
Yeah, so when we played in London, one of my co-employees was a huge English Premier League fan, and I knew nothing about it. This is like before even Ted Lasso, and he took me to an English Premier League game, and I fell in love with it. It was the greatest thing, and I was just amazed that on a Saturday, the number of professional soccer games going on in the English Premier League at the same time in such a close distance. I mean, literally miles away, you can see the stadium, 20,000 fans, and there's the culture of how they went to the pub first and then they go to the game, and just how the fans were so involved in the game. It's so entertaining for me, as an American, to watch how they just enjoy the game so much. So there's stuff to be learned about that in football as well. And I've gone to London now twice for Bears games. And the first time we showed up at Wembley Stadium, and there was every jersey represented from every NFL team as we're pulling up. I've never seen that before. It's usually one or the other. And they're cheering, and none of them are wearing our jersey. And then we played the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, and the Tampa Bay Buccaneers wanted this to be a home game for them. And we didn't want to give up a home game, which was good, so they wanted it to be. So everyone had Tampa Bay Buccaneer flags, and they were encouraged to cheer for the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. And as we started to turn the game and win, they dropped the flag, and they were cheering for us.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Everybody likes a winner.
Everybody likes the winner. It was like Rocky IV,
That's funny. And you've gone from a uniquely American sport to a much more global sport.
Yeah, it's been a strange journey. I mean, I think, I never thought I'd be working in soccer, but I grew up in Europe as an Army brat, and my team was Stuttgart, and we would go and, on the weekends and watch them play. So, and I played soccer when I came back to the U.S. Growing up in Vermont, it was one of the, especially in a small state like Vermont, football is very expensive. All the gear you need, and all you need is a pair of shorts and a soccer ball. So a lot of the high schools around my area were soccer high schools, and so it's surprising to find myself in soccer now, but it has been a great evolution. And obviously the international nature of the national teams and competing on the national stage makes it super exciting, because you're seeing the best players play all the time, which is something that NASCAR obviously has in common. The best drivers are competing every weekend. We don't have the same sort of regional competition model that a lot of the other sports have, but they're very, very different, sort of sports to be in, but lots of comparables. We're all doing the same thing. We're all trying to drive, eyeballs to the sport. We're all trying to grow the sport. What Cliff said about football is very true of NASCAR. Not a lot of kids are racing race cars in the neighborhood. So trying to, figure out how to get those fans in the door is a fascinating but not unique problem. Every sport is trying to do it. So lots of analogies, lots of similarities, and yet lots of differences.
Great. All right. I don't see any other questions from the audience. So any parting shots from our panelists? Any funny stories you'd like to share? Anything else? Nope.
I'm a little scared to share any of my funny stories. They're probably slightly inappropriate, so I won't do that.
Okay, good.
Yeah, no, it's a good, for me, like, just being in this business, I mean, it's, it's a dream come true in terms of just, Sarah, I think, asked me, like, what's your favorite part of your job? And I said, I get to go to work every day, look out the window, and watch football. you know, even though I'm working, that's going on all the time. My first day on the job, someone opened the door for me as I walked in the house hall, and it was Brian Urlacher, and I thought, man, this is really cool. So just, you know, it's a cool experience, and if you do work in sports, and I know Karen has experienced this, the network of lawyers out there they're very tight, and there's no competition there. So even though we compete with these teams on the field, they've been so helpful. And so I always remember that when I came in, that was an incredible resource for me when you kind of feel lost. And so as new attorneys come in, like I always make sure, you know, I contact them, I make sure they know I'm here to help them. We're always sharing forms, policies, practices, or just, I'm a big proponent of, you know, just keeping that network open and always talking. And we do it at the local level. I'm sorry, Karen, Brett hasn't invited you yet, but we do the local sports teams. We do talk on a regular basis just because we're always going through common issues, and we'll make sure it's at least a half hour. And if there's nothing to be said, but a lot of times somebody has something like, oh, I'm going through the exact same thing.
I totally agree with that. I mean, I think sports is, it's been a real contrast to private practice. A lot of us have come from private practice. Private practice is very competitive, and you know, the billable hour is king. And so some of us who have managed to find our way into sports are, you know, very grateful. There's a lot of gratitude for having landed where we are, but also realizing how lucky we are to be doing what we're doing and hoping to pave the way for people behind us. I always remember my first ever, and when I was working for this civil litigation firm, they sent me off, I think it was a DUI, but it was basically like, here's the file, court is in 2 hours, go figure it out. This was Prince George's County, Maryland, like go figure it out. My stomach just dropped. Like I had no idea what I was doing. I had no idea where I was going. A client was paying for this, like for this first year lawyer to go out and do what? Like nobody had taught me anything. And I remember that feeling, and I said, I'm never, ever, ever want anybody who works with me or for me to feel that feeling. So I think a lot of us in sports are like that, are very, very much wanting to mentor the next generation, provide opportunities where we can, help where we can, and help each other. You know, some of these issues we face are unique to sports, and so having people you can pick up the phone and call, especially when you're not going to get a bill from them, is always really, really helpful. So I hope that people will feel free to reach out. I talk to a lot of young people. I try and mentor as many as I can. But, you know, it's a very good community of people that I have really enjoyed spending time with in my career. And SLA in particular has been a great resource for me.
Great. I think that's one of the really special things about the Sports Lawyers Association is, I mentioned it all earlier, is the people, but the connections that you make, the friendships you make, and how open and helpful people are to connecting with you and sharing what they've learned and answering questions, and we're all
and
going
if
through.
you're lucky enough, you marry into the community.
There you
marry
go.
another sports lawyer. It works out great.
That's awesome. Well, thank you both, Karen and Cliff. We really appreciate your expertise, your insights, your stories. This has been really great. Thank you, all of you, for coming out here and joining us today for our first in-person event in a really long time. Hopefully it's the first of many, many more to come, and we're not virtual only for a very long time. And for more information on the Sports Lawyers Association or things like content like this, please check out our website and our social media channels, SLA Live. We've got all sorts of great things posted. YouTube, we have a wonderful YouTube channel, so check it out. If you're not members, please join us. It's a great organization to be a part of, and we hope to see all of you in Atlanta in May for our in-person annual conference. So with that, thanks again for coming. Thanks everybody for watching, and have a great night. Thanks.
Thank you very much.
Good job. Good job.